Yes, you can start whenever you'd like.
Okay, today's the 21st of April. I'm calling to order the county facilities meeting. And the first item is to approve the minutes of the prior meeting. Do I have a motion to do that? A motion by Ms. Hogan, seconded by Mr. McGowan. Thank you. All in favor? Raise your hands. Okay.
Aye.
I see the hands. Opposed? Okay, so we have that passed. Now, I have in attendance, and correct me if I'm wrong, Amanda, I see Mr. Bruno, I see Mr. McGowan, I see Mr. Diamond's in the room, I see Ms. Hogan. I don't see Ms. Sieber or Mr. Conover. Are they?
I don't see them either.
Okay, thank you. I just want to know who's on the committee and who's there. All right, we're going to start off then with the buildings and grounds. That will be first. There's two agendas. Obviously, that will be the first agenda we go over. Kevin, I'll turn it over to you right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. The first item that we have on the buildings and grounds agenda is a request for closure of a capital project H291. This project was for some elevator repair at the county center. The repairs that were requested in reality were sold to us by and I'll let Frank jump in if I miss anything, kind of by an elevator company that said we needed to do some type of a clamp on our elevators in case they ever collapsed, that this clamp would catch the elevator and stop it from falling from, say, the second floor to the first floor. We budgeted money for it, but then when we looked into it, we realized that these, and this was done years and years ago, that these clamps would actually damage the cylinders to the elevators, and then we would have to do a replacement on the entire kind of hydraulic system for the elevators. So we never completed the project, put it on hold. We are not going to move forward with it. In reality, the way our elevators work anyways, if it was to collapse, it would lower itself slowly to the first floor. It would never fall, at some high rate of speed from it's only second floor to the first floor. So we never ended up doing the project. These are the ones that are on the budget analysis report every month from the treasurer's office. And we're going to close the project and return the funds to the fund source, which is I believe it's the building reserve. It's the municipal center reserve rehab county buildings.
Do I have any discussion on that? It seemed pretty open and dry. Do we need a motion for that, Amanda?
Yes, you will.
Was that a yes?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Do I have a motion to close the funds for close the capital project H29? I see a motion by Mr. McGowan. Do I have a second?
Second.
I see a second by Rachel and Mr. Bruno, so we'll give it to Rachel first. I saw her first. Dan, sorry about that. All in favor of closing the project? Raise your hand so I can see you on screen. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, thank you.
Mr. Diamond is also voting for the motion.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jack. Okay, next item on there, Kevin?
We have no other action agenda items. Under referral of pending items, we have a couple of different items. One of them is the out front of the county center. We talked about doing something for the concrete area front entrance. There's been a lot of discussion of what could be done out there. We haven't really taken this any further. I've actually kind of put Clark Patterson on hold of coming up with some type of concept for now, just for the simple fact that with everything else going on, we're actually falling behind now on the phases 3 and 4 of the court work because of everything that's going on with the coronavirus. So I've kind of put them on hold. I don't know if it's we should be, and it's not my decision, it's your guys, but I told them to kind of hold off on that until we get moving forward with the court. I'm not sure if anybody, has anything else that they want me to do with that for now, but I've kept them kind of at bay until kind of things clear up around here for us.
I guess so. The question I'd ask the committee is, do they want to continue with Cliff Patterson doing a $5,000 preliminary study, or do they want to have Cliff Patterson put that on hold for now until we know a better financial situation? Mr. McGowan.
Yes, I'll start off. I agree that we should put this on hold. I don't think this is a priority, even though I do not like all the concrete. But right now, I think the best thing we ought to do is tighten the belt where we can. So I'll go with put on hold.
Okay. What's the rest of the committee's selection? Ms. Hogan?
Will they hold the 5,000 for the design for us?
I think they will. Clark Patterson is our term agreement contractor. They're on retainer with us every time we need them for something that we can't do here in house. They have that already in an LOA with me, so I don't see that being an issue unless it carried on in the next year, and then they may increase it a little bit. But I don't know. I can't for now. If it's sometime later this year, the $5,000 would be, I think, they would hold it for now.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Amanda, do you see any hands?
Nope, none here.
Mr. Bruno, do you have a question?
No, I just want to say I agree with Mr. McGowan. I don't think this is a time where we should be spending the money on this. It's a good idea. I'm all for it, but it's been there this long, and I think we can leave it until we get a clearer picture of our finances down the road.
I concur wholeheartedly. We discussed this with Mr. Hajos earlier in the week, or actually last week. So we seem to be all on the same program to currently leave it as is, or not have Cliff Patterson go forward, put it on a holding pattern until we have a better handle on their finances here at the county. Okay. Mr. Hajos, anything else for public buildings and grounds, rather?
Yeah, the last thing on the referrals, and this came out of environmental concerns and real property, as to put a plan in place to address the asbestos in the old jail connected to the municipal center. I'm not sure what that was. I was not part of that environmental concerns and real property. I'll just remind everybody, probably a couple years ago, when we kind of re-looked at or kind of reinvestigated the old jail facility. That facility has asbestos in it, and it has lead-based paint. And the last mitigation cost that we had for that facility to remove that was somewhere in the $90,000 range. Frank, I know you're on, correct me if I'm wrong, but today's day, it's probably $120,000. Again, this was 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago. But there was also another option on the table, was to demo it. Frank, was that, correct me if I'm wrong, $800,000 plus or minus to demo that facility?
Yeah, it was 800,000, and then I believe there was actually I think it was 1.2 million, and then if we demoed the entire building and removed it after demo, then it was 800,000.
Okay. So what Frank's saying is if they remove it up front, I think, there's that added extra cost in there to remove it up front and mitigate it for the lead base as well as the asbestos. But if they just demoed it all in place and consider all the material hazardous, then there really wouldn't be necessarily a separation of removing the asbestos or lead. They just consider it all hazardous, and then they dispose of it that way, properly, of course. But again, it's anywhere from $800,000 to a $1.2 million cost.
Okay, I believe that since we don't have any objective for use of that building or to have it torn down, again, in these fiscal times, I don't see moving forward with spending the money to remove the asbestos. But what's the committee's thought? Claudia? Well, I'll first the committee, then you, Claudia, okay? Anybody on the committee have thoughts? Brad?
Yes, I mean, I'm still, I've kind of put it on hold, and I've been, need to hook up with Terry. I've talked to Kevin about this and some of the other ones, with a plan with like a regional morgue. where we can, it's a good function for that, that area. I have looked at the plans, you know, and the reports and that, and yes, there is, you know, the asbestos tile and there is, yes, lead because it's been painted so many times, but, you know, a lot of this stuff could just be sealed and for, so I say right now, let's put this on hold. It's been there for years and it's not, hindering on our building because it's pretty much sealed off, but I'd like to, maybe, get together with Terry and maybe look forward to, putting a committee together because, to help me with, moving forward with, you know, like a regional morgue and getting, it's, well, I don't want to get into it, a bit of big meeting here, but I'll discuss it more with you later, Doug. But I say put this on hold. Right now, I think, like I said, once again, we got to tighten the belt on everything we're doing.
I think that's a consensus of the entire board, about belt tightening for sure. I'm going to open this up to other supervisors now. Ms. Bramer, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Chairman Beatty. I think what came out of our committee was that the building has been sitting there for a long time. It's got the contamination. We just spent $70,000 or whatever it's going to be tearing down a building that is not a county facility. So maybe we do look at spending $90,000 or $120,000 to clean up a building that we do own and that could be repurposed, like Supervisor McGowan said. I've heard other suggestions like a regional emergency animal shelter for situations where we really need something like that. But I'm sure there's other ways that we can repurpose it. I'm not pushing for this to happen right away, but I will say the money in the reserve testing fund can be used for this. And just like we did with the computer reserve yesterday, that money can't be used for anything else. So it's not going to really impact the budget either way if we don't use it or do use it, because that money is sitting there to be used for a specific purpose. And like we spent the money on the computers programs yesterday, we could spend the money on this and go forward. But I certainly understand it's a difficult financial time and we should be very careful. Just keep in mind this money is set aside separately. Although I'm sure it's going to take Supervisor McGowan or whoever else is working on this some time to figure out an actual plan. So I would like us to see us move forward. I just don't think it's really urgent since it's been sitting there for so long.
Right, and I think we've had a lot of discussion and no one's come up with anything to actually use the building for. Mr. Wild, you had a question?
Mr. Chairman, thanks. It's a general question. Supervisor Bramer mentioned that the money's in the reserve and we cannot repurpose that. I'm wondering if that's actually true. And I don't know if Mr. Swan is on or not, but I'm just curious.
Well, yesterday, Supervisor Wild, it was said, I think Administrator Moore said, we could technically get the money out of those reserve funds. We just have to undo the way that they were put in there. I guess I'd be hesitant to do that with any of our reserves. They're there for a reason, but yeah, we could start gutting our reserve funds. I think, right, Ryan?
I'm gonna ask Mr. Moore to chime in.
Yeah, that's correct. We could undo reserves. We would have to look at each one of them, talk to the treasurer's office. They are there for a purpose. Think about the Westmount Reserve, for instance. It's there to pay legacy costs. But you've also got to think about it from a budgetary perspective. If we're a long ways away from doing the 2021 budget, but if we want to take the perspective that we shouldn't increase county tax levy, then and reserves are a way to do that, then it's a strategy that we could consider.
Okay, any other comments from the actual committee? Mr. Bruno?
Yeah, I would just be very leery, very careful about doing any of these things at this point in time. It's a matter of perception, whether the funds affect the budget or not. You're going to have to explain to the public when they see things going on that they perceive or know are not really necessary, and they don't know all the ins and outs of where the money comes from. Again, it's a perception. I don't think it would look good So I think, we just need to go very slowly with any expenditures at this point.
Mr. Hajost, did you have a comment?
No, I don't have any comment.
Okay. All right. Do I see any other committee members or other board members that may be tuning in for a comment? Amanda, am I missing any? No? Okay. All right. So is it, this was just a referral and pending item. So I guess I'm going to ask the committee if we want to put this, move this forward to another month to discuss further, or Ms. Hogan, your thoughts on that?
I think I'd like more of a plan. So can we put together the committee Brad was suggesting, or can Brad start working on that and maybe a month or 2 months or whatever down the road, we could discuss it again? I don't want to bounce it back to environmental. I think it's here, it's in our court. But I think we need a better plan.
Well, okay. It has been discussed though in detail for a few years now. And so I guess I'm not sure what the plan was going to change unless Mr. McGowan thinks that there's a purpose for that building, a different purpose for the current building. Then I would be willing to talk to Mr. McGowan after the meeting and discuss maybe putting together some people or ideas and discussing it at next month's meeting after I've talked to Mr. McGowan. I don't think now's the time to spend a half an hour going into it with him, but I'd be more than willing to do that after the meeting's over, Ms. Hogan, and see what he's got in mind. Is that all right? Is that good with you? Okay, very good. Okay, so that will conclude buildings and grounds. Ms. Seaver, do you have a comment?
I did, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I tried to raise my little blue virtual hand in the corner. I just wanted to echo Supervisor Hogan's suggestion because it does sound as though Supervisor McGowan is raring and ready to go with working on some aspects of this committee or ad hoc committee. And I would just ask, Mr. Chairman, that once you have had an opportunity to talk to Supervisor McGowan, perhaps that list of committee members, in the spirit of transparency, could come back to this committee. We could talk about it and make sure moving forward that we have the representation that fully, would represent the entire county and those interests. So just to keep it as a pending item, but to know that between now and the next meeting, as Supervisor Hogan suggested, maybe that's something that Brad can really work on, since he seems very excited to do it.
Definitely. Full transparency, that's the only way I know how to roll. So there'll be, after I talk to Mr. McGowan and figure out what he wants to do and who he would suggest before anything actually happens, it would go in front of the full committee for their approval or not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's
how it would roll. Okay, I'm going to conclude the buildings and grounds portion of this. We're going up. Mr. Hajost?
I just have one thing to add, if I could, is just so you're all aware, the OES facility, the new building that they're getting, work will be starting on that very soon. We actually just had last Thursday and Friday the building delivered, and they were out there doing the survey yesterday for the layout of the new facility. So I just wanted to give everybody a heads up on that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's now go to the facilities portion of the airport portion of our facilities meeting. And I'm going to start this off. Everybody hopefully has their agenda. I'm going to start this off with Mr. Hajost talking at the bottom of your agenda about the Federal CARES Act airport grants update. So, Mr. Hajost, would you go slow for everyone, because there's some information there. Thank you.
I will. So we're under information for discussion and review right now. And then what I'll end up doing is I'll jump up to the resolution request on page 11, 15, and 16, because they all are sort of combined together. Federal Aviation Administration has come out with the CARE Act, which is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. Basically, what they're doing is giving out grants to airports, and there's two parts to this. The first part is, and Don, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the first part about this is any fiscal year 20 projects, FAA is now going to cover 100% of the cost of those projects. So for us, the snow removal equipment building is one of them. So I think we had originally estimated out like a $3 million cost, and I think the local match was going to be about $167,000. We will not have to foot that local match. In fact, when I say they're doing 100% of the project, they're actually covering the local match as well as the state's match also. So whatever we budgeted this year, which we had done last year for going into this year, the money that we put in for the local match, we will not have to use that on that project. We also have two smaller projects. One was the airport pavement management project, which that was about a $4,000 local match. And then the last one was some taxiway lighting. That was a $2,500 match. So for us, the savings with local match this year since, and again, this is only for fiscal year 20, the local match savings for us this year is approximately $174,000. One of the other things that the second part of this CARE Act is for operation and expenses, Federal Aviation also came out with a list of all airports that they were giving basically money to that can be used for operations and such. We just had Frank Thomas sign the grant for this portion of it last week. Our airport, as well as a couple other local airports, Saratoga County, the one out in Fulton County, they're GA airports. They're all receiving $69,000 to basically be used for any expenses at the airport. With that being said, and again, this is free and clear money. It's $69,000. There's no local match or anything to go along with it. So with that being said, I guess I will jump up to kind of resolution requests on page 11 of your agendas. This basically authorizes an application, and again, Frank has already signed the application. You'll see it there. We actually had to make a change to it. FAA came back this morning and said under the details section they wanted something more. So we'll have Frank re-sign the application, but it's basically for us to sign to get this $69,000. So that's resolution request number 11. I can continue to go, Doug, or I can kind of do the rest of the resolutions to go along with it if you like. It's up to you.
Okay, so we're clear on this then. Frank or Kevin just talked about the request authorization number 11 to apply for the $69,000 that the federal government's going to give us. And you said, Kevin, that they need you to update it or something this morning?
Yeah, they sent us back an email this morning just asking us to change. We had under the description, I think, we just put under the description title of it. It was CARE Act. They asked us to put a little bit more into it. So we will, and we've already sent it to Amanda to have Frank re-sign it. So again, this is just basically having the chairman apply for this grant so we can get this money rolling into us. FAA is really pushing for these grant applications to get in because they would like to start, maybe from the federal level, they would like to start disbursements of this funding as soon as they can.
Okay, so you'd like to ask the committee for authorization to go ahead forward with this grant, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, do I have any discussion on that before I ask the committee if they'd like to go forward? Yes, Ms. Hogan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear, Kevin, the $69,000, you're just going to use it to offset operations, or are you going to make new plans with that money?
I'm gonna use it to offset operations, and I'll go into that with the next two resolutions that I have on the agenda.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no discussion, Amanda, does Mr. Diamond on the committee have anything to say there in the boardroom?
It does not appear so.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Amanda, do we need a vote on this authorization to go forward?
Yes.
Okay, So I'm going to take a vote. All in favor of going forward with this grant authorization?
No, you'll need a motion and a second.
I'm sorry. I'll need a motion first. Motion by Mr. McGowan, second by Ms. Hogan. Okay, any other further discussion on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Are all in favor of going forward with the grant allocation? Raise your hand or, okay, I'm seeing the thumbs up. That's,
Brian is voting in favor as well.
thank you very much. Okay, done. Next item, Mr. Hajos.
Okay, so on the next item, which would be page 15 of your agenda, it's a transfer of funds. Basically, this is a transfer of funds out of airport salaries into airport contracts. We had our FAA inspection earlier this year. We did fairly well on most of the inspection. The only thing that they had reviewed and said that we needed to update was the striping on the airport. So we got a cost through Sourcewell to get, and it's from I think it's Highline pavement markings, to come in and stripe our airport. It's a requirement because we're a Part 139 airport to bring it up to whatever FAA standards require us to. So the cost of that is about $49,000. So what I'm doing right now is I'm transferring money from airport salaries into contracts to cover the cost of that. But basically, I'm transferring in $69,000. And if I can go to the next agenda, which is on page 15, it's an amended the budget to bring in this $69,000 from FAA. What we're doing is, and the reason, and I explained this to Doug last week, but I'll explain it to everyone here. We could just take the money from FAA, the $69,000, and put it into covering the cost of the pavement markings. With that being said, as I said earlier, FAA really wants to disperse this money fairly quickly. Doing that, it's easier for us, and they're allowing us to do that, to say use operating expenses like a salary or utility bills, because all I have to do is submit to them timesheets for a salary, and they'll automatically reimburse us. If I submit a utility bill, all they have to see is the bill from the utility company, and they will reimburse us for that. For going through the process of having us submit to pay for the pavement markings, it's a little different. We have to go through a procurement process. We have to go through the requirements of MWBE. We have to go through an approval of scope through FAA, which that stuff all takes a little bit longer. So since they're allowing us to use it for anything, we just thought it would be easier to use it against the salaries or utilities. So that's why, number one, the first resolution, I'm just going to transfer the money out of their salaries into contracts to cover the cost of the striping, and then the money that comes in will automatically go back into salaries from FAA. So those are the two resolutions. I'm sure there will be some questions, so I'm more than willing to take some.
Okay, questions from the committee. Ms. Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The quote for the striping was 20,000 less than what you're transferring now.
That's correct, but I'm going to put the money into 470, which is under contracts. And then for utilities are also paid out of contracts as well. So if I use it to cover the cost of some of the utilities, they're under 441, and I can do an inter-fund transfer under the 0.4 codes to be able to pay for that 20,000. Or to be able to use that 20,000 towards utilities or something else.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Ms. Seaver.
Doug, I'm going to show you how to pull up that chat option on the side of your those little hands, just so you know.
I like it this way. I'm old school.
Well, anyway, I'll FaceTime you later about it. So I just wanted to say thank you, Kevin Garrett, or Kevin, Kevin Garrity spends enough time talking to me. Kevin Hajos spoke to me this morning, and really explained this process to me. And I had a lot of those similar questions. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I know in the past I've been very critical or analytical anyway of all the transfers in and out of budgets, and particularly within how much we see with facilities and airport and whatnot. So Kevin, I appreciate the way that you're looking at this and looking ahead to maximize those dollars as well. So I think you did a lot of homework on it, and I definitely support it.
Thank you.
Okay, further discussion. I see Ms. Bramer's hand.
Thank you, Chairman. I understand the transfer. I think that makes sense, especially with Supervisor Hogan's question about why we're moving basically 20K more than the cost of the painting. So that makes sense to me. What I do want to raise or ask the committee to consider once again is our Part 139 certification. It sounds like this is another cost that we're having to incur based on that certification, which we went back and forth about. It didn't sound like we really needed it. Kevin, would you have been doing the painting at this time anyway? Or is this something that is directly related to the Part 139?
No, this is, and Don, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it is directly related to the Part 139. Typically, as we said before, if we didn't have the 139, not that Don and I would not keep the airport safe, we would. But when they came in and did the inspection, they determined that reflectivity of the paint was not enough, so they were requiring us to redo it. We think maybe, in our own opinion, we probably could have held off maybe another year, maybe another 2 years before we did this. So this is an expense that came up, and luckily enough, with this CARES Act, we're receiving this money because my initial kind of coming to this committee was to ask for money out of the contingency fund to pay for this pavement marking update. Luckily enough, now that we have the CARE Act money, that we can transfer the salary money and do that, and I don't have to ask for contingency money. But it was an unbudgeted item. We wouldn't have had the money for it.
Okay, it wasn't budgeted. Okay, yeah, so that's on top of what we said last time when we talked about this, that it was only kind of like a $10,000 savings to get rid of Part 139, but maybe it's gonna add up more often than we originally thought. I know Don did a great analysis. I'm just saying it could be worse than we think, and maybe we should reevaluate dropping that certification. I'm done. I see McGowan. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, I will turn it over to Mr. McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Claudia, I understand it, but at the meeting, I will say that Don and Kevin said if we did drop it, we'd still be keeping the the standards of the airport up to a 139 classification. So even though this was an unbudgeted amount coming in, I'm pleased that we're getting the money to do it, and we're keeping our airport at a top-notch space. So like I said, it was pros and cons of keeping that 139, but Don and Kevin, quote me if I'm wrong, but we did say that we were going to keep the airport up to the standards of a 139, correct?
Yeah, we are. We just wouldn't have the FAA inspections. That's all we're saying. So as I said, we may think that the reflectivity in the paint could be a couple more years. They say no, it's right now.
Mr. DeGraw, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I was just concurring with both statements.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to need a resolution for number 15 on your item list. Do I have a resolution? I see a resolution by Ms. Seaver, second by Mr. McGowan. Discussion? Okay, I will call the question. All in favor of the transfer of funds for number 15, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And Amanda, how did Mr. Diamond vote?
He's voting in favor.
Okay, thank you. All right, next item, Mr. Hagos.
Yeah, the last item, again, went along with this, and this was just to amend the budget. So the purpose of this resolution, which is on page 16, was to amend the 2020 budget to reflect the $69,000 from FAA for this CARES Act. This would be putting the money in the appropriation code of salaries and the revenue code that I had the treasurer's office create, which is the A5610-4405 CARES Act COVID-19 revenue code.
Okay, do I have a motion to move that? Motion by Ms. Hogan, second by Mr. McGowan. Discussion? All in favor? Hands up or
Aye.
aye? And Amanda, how did Mr. Diamond vote?
Mr. Diamond is voting in favor.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Next item, Mr. Hajos.
And now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. DeGraw to start on page 2 of the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Mr. DeGraw.
Good morning, everybody. On page 2, a resolution request to apply for New York State grant. It's for funding phase 2 of the T hangar development. We're asking for the maximum allowable grant amount of up to $1.5 million, which if we went for that would be $150,000 local share.
Okay, discussion by the committee. Mr. McGowan.
Oh, no, are we moving? Discussion? No,
Okay, so I'm going to need a motion then. Let me get my sheets out here. I'm going to need a motion to authorize us to apply for the grant. Motion by Mr. McGowan, second by, anybody going to second that? Mr. Conover, thank you. Any further discussion on that? Ms. Hogan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear, because it's a little bit unclear on the paperwork, this is budgeted?
This is just an application, so it's not budgeted yet. So it'll be for next year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye or raise your big paw. I see the big paws. Thank you. Opposed? How did Mr. Diamond vote, Amanda?
In favor?
Thank you. Next item. Oh, Mr. Wild, did you have a question?
I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And it's about the budget process for next year. We are talking about spending $150,000 next year for this, even though we're trying to limit our budget expenditures. Are we prepared to make that investment, or is that a decision that we can make next year? And actually, just follow up a little bit further. If we do apply for this grant, do we have to take it if we're awarded? That's all I had. Those 3 kind of
Thank
questions.
you. Mr. DeGraw?
Well, the resolution authorizes the chairman to execute the grant. Typically, if the grant is awarded, the New York State would want to see it executed. So, again, this is a revenue-producing project that that will have a payback period on it. So, it's up to the committee. But in the long term, it will produce revenue, much-needed revenue for the airport.
Okay. So, further discussion on that? Okay, seeing none, we just voted in favor of authorizing you to go forward with the grant request. Thank you. Next item, Mr. Graw.
This is on page 4, and this relates back to the FAA discrepancy for the airfield markings. We currently have a contract in place with Highlight Airfield Markings. The limit is $20,000. We're asking that you raise the limit to $75,000 for this year's $50,000 project and any potential projects in the future, because we want to keep rolling this service contract over from year to year.
Okay, discussion. Mr. McGowan?
yeah, I kind of missed all that.
Okay, so we in order for somebody to come and work on the airport, we have to have a general service contract in place. The service contracts have a not to exceed limit. The current contract that we have with Highlight is for $20,000. This year, we're going to have $50,000 worth of painting on the airfield. So we'd like to increase the not to exceed amount for the service contract up to 75, just to allow us to do this $50,000 project this year. And, you know, in the future years, if we had one that was 55,000 or 60 or whatever the case may be, we wouldn't have to get a new contract. all these dollar figures still need to be budgeted, and they still need to be approved by the committee.
So the reason for the increase is because we want to throw the line striping in there.
Yeah, this is a service contract with highlight airfield markings. It simply allows them to work at the airport, and we just want to increase the not to exceed limit from 20 to 75.
Mr. Ajos?
I just want to add into that, what Don's referring to in that $20,000 contract, I am able to, as the superintendent of public works, sign contracts up to $20,000. Anything above $20,000, we have to come back to committee for approval. Again, this is just to increase the contract. We're not going to spend $75,000 this year. We'd have to come back to committee and ask for that. We're, in reality, based on what FAA has kind of said that we need to do for our striping this year, we're only going to spend the $49,000 to highlight this year. But this is just to increase the contract. If next year FAA comes back in and says, hey, you have a couple other spots that need to update your striping, that they may have not said needed it this year, then we have a contract in place, but we'd still have to come back to committee and ask them.
Ms. Hogan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand what you guys are doing and why you're doing it. I'm just asking the committee to take a moment and really consider this. We've been bit by the do not exceed problem before, and I'm a little bit reluctant to go to 75 when the work is only 49. Is there room for negotiation here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could bring it to 60.
But do you guys get why I'm saying what I'm saying? I don't want there to be any misunderstanding here.
Mr. Ajos?
Andrea, what we would do is they're gonna have this not to exceed the limit of 75,000 just in their contract, but they've already given us basically the quote for the striping that has to be done this year. That's all we're paying them, is for the quote that they've done this year, period. Nothing above and beyond that quote. So the 49,000 that they've quoted us for the pavement markings that FAA says we need to update, that's all we're paying them for this year. This is just to keep the contract in place. Next year, I don't know if next year FAA comes in and says, hey, you now have this, this area to update striping. We would have a contract with this guy. We wouldn't have to renew another contract with them. We'd have the contract in place. Then we would still come back to committee and say, hey, we have another $30,000 project this year. We need money, but we already have a contract in place. We just need to add the money. That would be, we would have to come back to committee for it. So I understand your concern, but we're not going to exceed the 49,000 that we have a quote with them.
I understand that. Is there another level of protection somehow that we can put into this contract for an annual work plan or something else? Is Mary with us? Anybody from her office even with us? I don't see her.
You know what? Can I maybe make a suggestion?
Go ahead.
If possible, why don't we just do the contract for this year for 50,000? That's a little over the 49,000 that they quoted us. And then that'll still keep the contract in place, but it'll cover the cost of the striping for this year. Then if we go to renew it or up it next year, then Don, you will talk about increasing the price at that point or adding something more into it.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, this gets a little confusing here, but this is just a general service contract. It's not specific to the project that we're talking about. It simply allows them to be able to come onto the airport and perform. Any specific project over $20,000 has to go before the committee before it can be authorized. So this is just a general contract saying you have the insurances, you're doing all the right things, you can come on to the Warren County and perform duties. But it's not specific for the project that we have now.
We do have Mr. Tillinger from the county's attorney's office. Did you want to say something, sir?
I would say probably another contract. An idea, something that I see Supervisor Huggins' idea of trying to curtail it so we don't have maybe things getting out of hand that way is what you're thinking. That time limit on it, as well as Mr. Hajo suggested lowering the cap on it to be closer to what the highlight contract is. You could definitely put a time limit on it that it's only for this particular fiscal year or anything like that. That would be a good metric to do that.
I could only hear half of what he was saying, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Louder is this. Okay. You could put a time limit on to the contract so that it's only for a certain fiscal year. You could also, as Mr. Hajo suggested, lowering the cap on it from 75,000 down to around 50,000. But you could definitely put a time limit on it that this is only for the contracts that occur during this particular fiscal year.
Well, do we renew this contract every year with them?
Yeah, that's the whole point of this contract, to be able to allow them to bid a project and then come and work at the airport. This contract, again, is not specific for any project. It's simply a service contract, which the county attorney's office makes us get for any service that occurs on county property. So we have service contracts with all our service providers. They're just a general contract. Once we have a specific project, then we get a quote and we go through the normal procurement for that quote. Anything over $20,000 will go before committee anyways.
And do we expect to have them come back this year at this point?
Well, what I want to do is set up an annual painting schedule so we don't get any more discrepancies, which is not a good thing. So I expect them to come back on an annual basis, but it'll be budgeted and it'll be for a much lower amount. I'm expecting $20,000 to $25,000 a year. And I'm hoping that we can get some grant money to help cover some of that in the future years, but not this year. This year it'll be a single project and that'll be that.
Ms. Seaver? I'm sorry, Ms. Hogan, were you done or did you have a follow-up?
Nope, I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions, and I think the first can be answered by Mr. DeGraw or Mr. Hajos. So it sounds to me like, as it relates to this specific contract, you have your 20,000 limit that you have to come back to committee on. So I'm assuming this is 75 because you haven't expended any money within this contract. So you add on your 49, and that's how you're rounding up to the 75. Is that correct? You haven't spent any money within this contract to date?
We have not, no.
Okay. So, and do you foresee spending any other money other than the 49 or the 50?
No, I think for this year, and Don, correct me if I'm wrong, as Don said, maybe in future years we'd budget for it, but for this year, the only money that we see coming out of this contract is for the striping requirement that FAA has put on.
Okay, so I would support Kevin Hajos' suggestion in terms of making this one be the 50 or 55, whatever it is that you specifically need for the painting, so that the resolution is accurate. I do agree with Ms. Hogan that we've had instances where, this has come back to bite us. However, I just want a reminder that any new contracts going through, before we vote on this at a full board, I know that Mary's office has done a great job at getting us those contracts ahead of time. And while this is a renewal, I assume the board's already seen this contract. Kevin, I'm not sure if you're aware of those discussions that have been taking place in committee recently about wanting to see contracts before the board we sign off on them. So to the extent anything new is coming through, but I understand it doesn't apply to this.
Mr. Hajos, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say, and you're right, Supervisor Seaver, I have not been part of those conversations as far as the contracts. Typically under my purview in my department, the board had granted, I think back in 2010, that the superintendent could go up to $20,000 in contracts. So typically what I do is I go through the county attorney's office, I have Mary review the contract, she signs it, I sign it, and then as long as it's under 20,000, then we give it to whoever the vendor would be, and then I can use them. Anything above the 20,000, then we always come back to committee with it. So typically, I'm not sure that the board actually sees the $20,000 I won, the $20,000 contracts that I do, but I typically go through Mary in the county attorney's office for every single one of those contracts, and she already has kind of the language in place for each one of the contracts that I have based on the scope of work that I give.
Right. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. I'm just referring to the ones I have to come through committee for that approval.
Okay. So does the committee want to amend the motion to go from 20 to 50? Is that the will of the committee, or is it to stay at the current verbiage from 20 to 75? Ms. Hogan, did you want to have that resolution amended? You're muted, Ms. Hogan.
Oh, sorry. Who made the motion to begin with?
There is no motion at this point. You're amending the request.
Okay,
So-
thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to amend the request to 50,000.
Okay, do I have a second? Mr. McGowan's a second. Okay, so any discussion on that? I think we've discussed it pretty good, but any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call the
Mr.
vote.
Diamond has his hand raised.
Pardon me?
Mr. Diamond?
Thank you. Mr. Diamond, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing I'd suggest, I agree with, the $50,000 cap for limitations, but I'd like to include that in the language of the resolution that it expires at the end of 2020. We just limit it to the 1 year, as suggested by the attorney.
The county attorney, okay.
This is Don. I would like to remember, this is just a general service contract. I'm going to need airfield painting on a year-to-year basis. So then we'll just have to come back and ask for another contract. It's not specific to a project. So I'd like this contract to roll over year to year, and it's fine to put the $50,000 or $55,000 cap on it. But I'm going to need more than 20 from a year to year.
Okay. Mr. Moore, what would you suggest?
My suggestion would be if you're comfortable doing the 50,000 for this year, and then towards the end of the year, we'll revisit it and we'll determine what an appropriate amount would be for next year.
Thank you. Mr. Conover, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I'm prepared to support the 50. I'm prepared to support the 70. It really doesn't matter. I'm prepared to support any amount under the service contract that's for projects that are approved by the board. And that's the point that they're trying to make here, is that they're bringing this contract into alignment with whatever the board approves. And so that it just makes it more efficient. But I can support the 50 if that's what people are comfortable at. I can support the 70. Heck, I could support 170, because the only way the 170 would be spent is per the approval of the board. That's the point you're trying to make here.
Thank you. Okay, Amanda, would you read back the amended resolution as we have it?
What is on the floor now is a motion to increase the not to exceed amount for this project from 20,000 to 50,000.
And Mr. Diamond would like to have the verbiage added that it's only good to the end of 2020. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So do we need to vote separately on adding the verbiage?
No, you would just need Ms. Hogan and Mr. McGowan to amend their motion to include that limitation.
Okay. Ms. Hogan, do you want to amend that verbiage?
No.
No. So, okay, so then we don't have a second to do that then, because you presented the motion originally. Okay, then I'm going to call the question. Are we, before I do that, Ms. Seaver has a question.
Sorry, I suppose this still falls under that discussion and debate area, particularly as we start talking about an amendment to a resolution. It was my understanding that amendment request was just to add the year. Ms. Hogan, that's what you're opposed to, adding the year?
Right, that it would expire at the end of this year. That's how I understood the amendment to be. And these guys were asking for it to be a carried over amount, which I'm fine with. I'm fine with that. It was the expanded amount that I wasn't.
Oh, okay.
Isn't the work to be done though within this year anyway? I mean, what's the?
But this contract doesn't cover that specific. It's a more, Kevin, help me out here.
It's just a general contract.
Right.
Service provider agreement. It doesn't specifically relate to what FAA has put on us this year. We're going to use it for that, of course, but it doesn't specifically relate to that one project. It would be for any general pavement markings that we have on the runway for years to come. It would just be an annual renewal. that, just to give an example, all the contracts that I have that are under $20,000, unless I have a problem with one of the vendors contractors, I renew them every year. I go through the county attorney's office and it's simply, we're going to renew it again, and it comes up on an annual renewal. Just going this route, and I understand where Mr. Diamond's coming from, but going this route, I just have to bring something back to the committee for renewal. It wouldn't be project specific. It would just be a renewal contract, which typically we don't normally do. We just do an annual renewal and we renew them every year.
I think to his point, he's just trying to separate out two issues that perhaps don't need to be combined together. But regardless, I think at this point, when we go to vote, I'm just abstaining. This is a bit crazy over this contract, which clearly I'm not understanding or not understanding the procedures that need to follow it. So, but Kevin, I give you credit. I still think it's a great thing to look forward to and hope you get it done.
Okay, Ms. Hogan, did you have a final comment? No? All right, so Amanda, please read back again the resolution that we currently have on in front of the committee.
The motion that you're voting on is to increase the not to exceed amount from 20,000 to 50,000. And this is to amend the service contract for the runway painting.
Okay, I will now call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Hand. Opposed?
Mr. Chairman, I'm opposed.
Okay, we have one opposed. Thank you, Mr. Diamond. And Ms. Seaver, you abstained?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So the vote is accurately recorded. Thank you. Next item, Mr. DeGraw.
The next item is on page 5. It's to authorize the closure of 2 capital projects for a total amount back to unused funds of $12,000.
We have a motion to bring that to the floor. Mr. McGowan, second by Mr. Conover. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Thank you.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Mr. Diamond is voting in favor.
Thank you very much. Okay. Next item, Mr. DeGraw.
Next item is on page 6. This is a request to reject all bids from the Phase 1 construction of a 10-bay T-hanger. The bids exceeded our grant amount by $222,000 for 10 bays. And we're going to repackage the bid and put out a smaller scope. So we're going to put out a scope for, instead of 10 hangers, we're going to put out a base bid of 6 hangers with an alternate of 2 additional for hopefully up to 8 hangers out of this Phase 1.
Discussion. Mr. McGowan.
All right, so this whole thing, didn't we start off years ago with 20 hangers?
Yes.
And then, you know, oh, the price of metal went up, which is not true. It did go up, but not as deep. And so now we started off with 20 years ago, and now we're down to 8. Correct.
Yes, because we had a finite amount of grant. So we had $903,000 available for this project, and the bids for 10 came in at $1.1 million. So we found some of the high areas. We're redoing the scope a little bit to reduce some fixed costs, and we're going to put the bid back out with a minimum of 6 on the base bid, and 2 additional hopefully will come in under the 903.
All right, let's hope for that.
Okay. Do I have a motion to bring this to the floor? Mr. Conover, do I have a second? Mr. McGowan, discussion on the item. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Raise your hand or aye.
Aye.
Opposed? How did Mr. Diamond vote, Amanda?
In favor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next item, Don.
Those are all the items for resolutions. The next thing would be the referral. We're still waiting, no word yet from the FAA on our determination for land use. So we're still waiting on that.
Okay, you're talking about the solar power site development, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, So we're still on a holding pattern, waiting for the FAA to come back, granting us permission to go forward with that project.
Yeah, they've shifted their attention to the CARES Act, and with a lot of people working from home, a lot of these non-essential requests have been put on the back burner.
Okay, rightly so. All right, thanks for that update on the referral and pending items. And I believe the final item on our agenda, ladies and gentlemen, is the information for discussion, which is the New York State budget bill, the aviation capital program update for 2021. Do you want to talk about that, Don or Kevin? Or
So I will, just real quick, just to keep the committee informed of what's happening at the state level. The governor is still strongly supporting aviation, and for fiscal year 21, he's looking to put $100 million in the Upstate Airport Economic Development Initiative Fund. So that's a good amount. We're hoping it stays in there. He does have the ability to shift that money, and we'll see what happens with the budget this year.
any comments on that? There's no action needed. It's just an informational piece. I'm a little concerned. Of course, we all are. That I applaud the governor putting $100 million into upstate airports. The reality is whether that full 100 million actually gets dispersed for 2021 is probably a long shot at best. As we heard yesterday, they already cut back mental health funding, making county pay 100%. And as I mentioned yesterday, that's just the first, I think, of a number of items that the state is going to cut back to the counties or programs that they thought they could fund, but obviously they're going to find out they just don't have the money to do that. So although it looks great for 2021 on paper, I unfortunately have strong doubts that that 100 million will ever come to fruition. But we'll see. I hope I'm wrong. But reality is reality. Are there any other, I'm going to open the floor up, open it up now to any questions from the floor. Mr. Wild, do you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, very quickly, and I'm sorry to delay your meeting even longer, but I do have a question for Kevin and Don. What does our revenue projections look like this year from the airport? You know, I don't know if we have actuals versus projected, but if you can give an update on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Don, I'll jump in real quick. I don't have specific numbers for you, Doug, or Mike. We're looking at that right now. A couple of things that we've noticed is one, with the coronavirus, of course, I think there are some revenues down. There's not a lot of planes coming in. Fuel sales are probably low, as well as the restaurant closed down in January, and they're not expected to open up, correct me if I'm wrong, Don, not until May. So that's actually going to impact our revenues for this year. But I don't have a final number for you yet. We're looking at that information now.
Thank you. Is there any way we can get an update for our next meeting to give us just a general overview of where we are from a revenue standpoint?
Well, I've got a couple of numbers here. The good news is all our hangars are full and all our tenants are paid up. So that's a significant revenue stream that hasn't been interrupted at all. And that came out of the last contract negotiation. So that's going to help us tremendously. Currently, year to date, as of the end of March, we are 8% down from the FBO income. Now, remember, offset with the hangar revenue, that 8% isn't a true 8% from, say, 2017, where we weren't getting the hangar revenue. So we're still ahead as far as revenue is concerned. We receive about $30,000 a year, plus or minus, from the airport restaurant, and I'm certainly hoping that the restaurant will open up in season this year. So we are going to lose some there, but we're down a little bit, but it's not real bad, and we can thank the revenue from the hangars, the 18 hangars that we have out here for a lot of that.
Thank you. That was a good job this committee did in negotiating a very sound contract with Skimmerhorn. It was very fair to Mr. Skimmerhorn, and it was even, and it was very beneficial to the county. As you recall, we went from 7 cents to 21 cents per gallon of fuel, which is the biggest revenue generator. So, and the hangars were also a huge piece of getting additional revenue. So thank you, Don. You were a big part of that, and so was Mr. Hajos, and I appreciate that. Are there any other questions? Amanda or Tammy, does anybody?
Yes, Mr. Diamond would like to speak.
Thank you. Mr. Diamond, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to comment on comment made by Supervisor Sieber in regards to reviewing these contracts. I have to agree with her that I'd like to see these contracts in advance of the discussions with the committee meetings. So we have an opportunity to look at the language, whether it's a renewal contract or whether it's a draft contract. I have difficulties voting on approving contracts when I haven't really read them, even at the committee level. So this is just something I want to add. If there's time, we can ask our attorney to provide us with that information so we can review it at the committee meetings, and hopefully we don't have to have any additional discussions after that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good point, Ms. Bramer, and definitely Mr. Diamond. Thank you. Any other discussions? Does anybody on YouTube, Tammy or Amy, wish to ask us a question?
Hi, Doug. It's Don Lehman. No questions on YouTube.
Oh, thank you, Don. I should ask you. Thank you, Don. Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Motion by Mr. McGowan, second by, someone wants to adjourn, don't they? Yeah, Mr. Conover. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye, or raise your paw. Paws are up. Nay? Okay, meeting adjourned.